Welcome to the Unknown Webcast. Today's guest, Bill Honsberger, knows up close and personal that I really am so conservative I can't turn left even when I'm driving. Those who are new to this webcast should be aware, forewarned. This is not a safe space for those who may be easily offended by having their ideas challenged or by our satire. Today is June 4, 2019, and this is broadcast number 147. This week, we are joined by one of our regulars, Bill Honsberger, a missionary to the New Age with Haven Ministries, to relay some stories from the mission field. My name is Don Vino. I'm president of Midwest Christian Outreach, Inc. in Wonder Lake, Illinois, which produces the Unknown Webcast. And our senior researcher is Ron Hensel, who will introduce the sponsors of today's webcast. And here is our pal, Ronnie.
Yeah, I'm still the senior researcher. Yeah, still hanging on here. It is greetings from sunny Florida, where the palm trees came out, saw their shadows, and we now have 12 more months of summer. Our sponsors for this webcast include Two Great Faiths That Taste Great Together, Reese's Jesus Buddha Cups, and the Designer Jesus Collection. No longer do you need to be embarrassed by your church's Jesus. No longer does he need to be a source of social embarrassment. The Designer Jesus Collection. And if you enjoy this webcast, or if you really hate it and you just want to inflict it upon others, to ensure your continual access to this program, please go to midwestoutreach.org, click the yellow donate button, and contribute as you feel led. And don't forget to subscribe to us on YouTube. Back to Don.
Yeah, and not only subscribe to us by YouTube, but if you copy the URL and put it in your Facebook, if everyone did that, we would increase, I don't know, hatred.
Like 6 billion people. What is it, 7 billion people now? If everybody did it?
If everybody did it.
Yeah, if everybody.
Yeah, but everybody's not on Facebook. Although, most are, it seems like. So, yeah. So Bill has been on his adventures, on his mission journeys, to the Midwest. Actually, he was in Kansas City, Missouri, and surrounding areas. Right? Did you go to Nebraska at the same time, or just
just Kansas City? And let me correct you, Don. When I first met you, so long ago, dinosaurs freely roamed the earth.
They did. Yeah.
I was a missionary for the
Conservative Baptists. Was just cooling. I know. Yeah.
Yeah. I was a missionary for the Conservative Baptists. I was their appointed missionary to New Age people. But Haven, 20 years ago, broadened our outreach. So we talk to New Agers. We go to New Age fairs, psychic fairs. We go to New Age bookstores. We go to all sorts of fun places. But we also go talk to Mormons, Buddhists, Muslims, JWs, and a whole host, atheists, and everybody else that we can get our hands on who are not technically New Agers. However, we will talk to them too and try to.
Okay. So I stand corrected, as I often have to be corrected. So
no kidding.
Now, when you finish talking to them, do they have this impression of you as a very hateful person?
What do you mean finish talking to them? That can start from the very opening discussion. I've had people screaming at me within one question.
So they do think of you as a hateful person.
Automatically, you ask a question and you're already a hateful person. Although it's really interesting. This whole trip to Kansas City, we talked to innumerable different kinds of Mormons, from Temple Lot to Community of Christ to several remnant restored groups to the regular old-fashioned LDS people, the group formerly known as Mormon. We talked to Scientologists. We talked to Hare Krishna. We had a great time, and it was all very friendly, and we had numerous conversations that lasted 2 to 3 hours, and nobody screamed at me, so it was a great week.
Well, Don, you had that experience with that Wiccan lady who thought, she was afraid of you, but at the end she realized she didn't have anything to be afraid of, right?
Yeah, it was really interesting. And I was at the last Parliament. Yeah, that was really interesting because as we started out, she had no idea what it was we believed. We were just talking about being at the Parliament. And then as we asked her to describe her beliefs and interacted with it with some questions, and then she asked us, she was shocked. At first she thought she should be afraid, and then she realized she wasn't afraid and had to take a picture of this. This was a Kodak for her to be with 3 conservative evangelicals and not being afraid. So, where does she get her idea that she ought to be afraid? I would say mostly from the media, although she could have run into some less than kind Christians.
Yeah.
She could have read just the title of my paper on that. Why not burn witches? You know, that might.
Well, that would scare me. We're just
Yeah,
right
so
there.
there we go.
I already think of you as a hateful person just by reading that. But
I'm honored.
but after about 10 minutes, don't they see your warm and cuddly side, Bill?
That's highly disputed. So,
Oh,
my
come
grandkids
on.
seem to like me. But that's just, you can't fool people when they're young.
Do you have a warm and cuddly side, Bill?
Not that I'm willing to admit to. You know, the thing is that at least for Haven, we really encourage our staff, and we had some volunteers with us this time, and several of our staff, and it was a great trip. And one of our volunteers, who swore that he was only going to shadow us and just learn and pray, got really excited. And he's an excitable boy.
Oh,
So
boy.
he was pounding the table during the last 20 minutes of our talk with the Mormons. And we're like, so we talked about it afterwards, but we don't scream at them. We don't yell at them. We don't spit at them. We don't cuss them out. All the things that has been done to me many times over the years. We don't do any of that to them. We love them. The gospel is offensive enough. To be told you're a sinner separated from the love of God is more than enough offense to get them riled up. To challenge the beautiful, wonderful, perennial philosophy that we're all God and there's no good and evil, that will get them riled up. So we don't need our bad breath, our lack of a shower in the last 2 months, or just our general lack of being a decent person. We don't need that to offend them. So our staff, we want to treat these people like we should, like they're our neighbors, and we're supposed to love them. Even if you want to see them as your enemies, which to us, they're in the clutches of the evil one. So they're personally not our enemies. The evil ideas are our enemies. So we're going to love them. And even as they react badly sometimes, we're still going to love them. And so, again, you can be hateful just asking the wrong question. That's the way our culture has been. It's so interesting to me, going to these places we've gone for so long and being at the university for so long, all this, safe space and political correctness, and my gosh, you can't say the wrong thing without offending somebody. That was all over the psychic fairs and all over the university has now exploded into our culture in the last 8-10 years. And so welcome to a world I've been swimming in for a long time. I've had people screaming at me who didn't even say hello. They just, because they knew I was a Christian, they started screaming at the university level. These are graduate students. These are supposed to be people who are, cold, dispassionate, able to look at ideas. It's a crock. They are so zealous, shall we say, for their version of their twisted gospel that anybody who opposes it, for example, I had a lady, doctoral student. From what everybody tells me, she's a nice lady. I walked into the classroom. She starts screaming at me because they knew I'd gone to Denver Seminary, which, well, I don't totally agree with this, is very conservative compared to DU Iliff, University of Denver and Iliff Seminary. And she starts screaming at me about the demon voice of God. Yeah. What the heck is that? I had never heard the term, the demon voice of God. Well, all those places in the Bible where, for example, it calls homosexuality a sin, that's the demon voice. When Jesus says he's the only way, that was the demon voice. You guys getting the pattern here?
So how do you know she was screaming at you? Maybe she was just screaming at
you. No, it was very directed. It was a day you don't forget. Hi, Bill.
But I think Ron's question is valid. Was she screaming at you, or were you the convenient foil for
I
her
happened to be in the neighborhood. I'm sure I caught a lot of her hatred. Most of the interesting thing about graduate school for me, by the time I got to the doctoral level at the University of Denver, they all hated Christians. They just didn't know any of them. But they hated them by definition. I understand this. This was me before I became a Christian. All Christians are idiots. They hate science. They hate philosophy. I knew that. I didn't know any Christians, but I knew and had nothing but, ugly disdain for anybody who called themselves a Christian. I was in a high school of 3,000 kids in Los Angeles. I didn't know a single Christian. There might have been there, but they were hiding from me. So when somebody acts that way, I understand them because they don't know any better. They really don't. And I had some great interactions with some of my professors. And I was the first Bible-believing Christian any of them had ever met. And, all of their, shall we say, presuppositions, again, which I completely understood because those were mine, kind of got messed up. And one teacher, I'll just say this, and this is not to my credit, not one bit. He sent me a letter one time. This guy's rabid anti-Christian, big time postmodern fan and all this kind of stuff. He sent me an email basically saying, I hate everything you stand for. And then he names by name, Jerry Falwell and Pat Robertson. So this is like 15, 20 years ago. He says, I hate those guys, but you're the first person I've ever met that walks the talk. And the reason was because we adopted some kids while we were in grad school. And to them, they're the nice people. Evangelicals, by definition, are mean and terrible and horrible people. So the fact that we had adopted several children at that point, really threw them for a loop. They didn't know how to respond because we're the hateful people. We don't do nice things. And again, you don't get out of your MSNBC bubble or, your Rachel Maddow clique or all these different progressive groups. That's all you know. It's not a surprise that what they think of us, Don and Ron, is nothing but, we're the hateful, evil, mean persons who hate all people by definition who don't agree with us. That's their paradigm, and they run with it.
If there's a defense for them feeling that way, it might be this. You and I met in 1993 at the Parliament of the World's Religions.
I'm still scarred from that.
I know. As what, meeting me or being there? Or both?
Mostly you, but yeah, the Parliament a little.
That'll do it. But fortunately, Joy kind of tempered that a little bit.
That helped. Yeah.
But as I was approaching the venue initially, there were a number of Christians on the outside with bullhorns and big signs, repent, you're going to burn in hell, that kind of really winsome approach. And then we had the opportunity to meet with Donald Frew, PR for Covenant of the Goddess. And a large part of our discussion revolved around Mike Warnke and Johanna Michelson and others, whose claims, as we knew at that point, were false. And his view of Christianity was the group outside when we approached and Michael Warnke of what true Christians are. And he rejected that. He was shocked that we actually would sit down and talk with him and make reasonable arguments for what we believed.
There used to be a group, the first psychic fair I ever went to was in Colorado Springs. And Colorado Springs has a large Wiccan community based in Manitou and several other cult groups down there. And so the psychic fair has been going on for years. So it's the first one I went to. And there were, again, like you just said, there was a group of Christians with big signs yelling at everybody. And I already knew, nobody gets yelled or screamed at into the kingdom. Nobody gets hated into the kingdom. They get loved into the kingdom. So I actually went out and talked to these guys and I said, hey, look, why don't you guys spend $5? Come on in and engage, talk. These are real people that God loves. Take them out to coffee, take them to lunch, go out and meet, treat them like real human beings. And it's amazing how much farther you can get than standing outside and yelling. But I think for some Christians, it's our own version of virtue signaling. Look, I yelled at the pagans for 5 hours, therefore I'm a virtuous, righteous evangelist. No, you're just somebody who yelled. And they don't listen to you and they mock you. And that's what as soon as I got in the door, I could hear all the witches and other people mocking the snot out of this. And I'm like, I don't think this is the thing you guys have in mind. So anyways, yeah, it is a problem. And I remember the conversation with Don and how well that went, I thought, for a long time until that other guy showed up. But I think, again, I wasn't raised around Christians. Don, you were not raised around Christians. What do you know? But what the TV tells you and the things your friends and your buddies in the media tells you, the songs, that mock the Christian faith. That's what I grew up on. And so you just go with what you know. And both my parents were rabid anti-Christians. That's the one thing. My parents split up when I was 6, but the one thing that both sides of the family agreed on, if you believe in any religion, you're an idiot. So, of course, that was the gospel for Bill. That's what I knew.
Yeah.
And meeting Christians who actually took it seriously was kind of shocking to me. Meeting the party Christians,
So you showed up in Kansas City, Missouri, a group of you, and embarked on meeting with a number of different kinds of groups. Now, you named several Mormon groups. Give us a little brief description. What are Temple Mormons versus Utah Mormons versus RLDS versus whatever?
All right. Well, just real simply, in the first day, if you go, Independence is the center of the Mormon world, not Salt Lake City, like most Americans think. Independence is where Joseph Smith predicted that Jesus would return and build his temple whenever Jesus come back. So all sorts of different kinds of Mormons are literally within blocks of each other in the middle of Independence. Independence is run by mostly Community of Christ, which used to be the reorganized Latter-day Saints, not the organized, not the LDS. Anyhow, there's a lot more history than we can go into on this thing, but let's just say that all these different Mormon groups are all centered around the same area. They all hate each other. They all claim to be the true Mormon group. Most people only know Salt Lake City. They know the LDS, the group formerly known as Mormons. So anyways, the first day we went to the visiting center for the LDS because it was raining real hard and the other groups looked like the other churches were shut down. So we went in there, and like we always do, we let the missionaries take us through a tour, and there was 5 or 6 of us, and some from our ministry, and Pastor Keith Gibson and one of his youth pastors were there. And everybody just grabbed some different missionaries and started talking to them, sharing the gospel with them. And we had a young lady from Fresno, California, and I invite people to pray for her, please. And we spent a couple of hours with her, and whoops, I lost. There we go. We had a great talk with her, and like always, we because they're all going to get married, they're all in college age from their missionaries, and we always talk about Joseph and who he is and what he did. We talked about Joseph and his innumerable wives, which they're ready for, but they're not generally ready for Joseph and his several wives. They were married to other men, actively married, when Joseph secretly married them. So with the LDS, that's a harmful one. And it used to shock them, but now it's on their website. You go to Gospel Topics, and you can see them saying this, admitting it, but putting a spin. Of course, he didn't have sex with them. He was just married to them.
Never.
Yeah. So what is the purpose of marriage for you guys? Let me see. Isn't it to have children? Isn't that the whole purpose, according to your own teaching? Yes. So it's a tough pill. Let me see. He didn't have sex with them now, but he can have sex with them eternally. So adultery's not good now, but it's okay for eternity. There's no way to spin this well for them. Anyway, so we had a great talk with her. And then, and so did the other folks who were talking to different people. Then that day we went over to Temple Lot, which is across the street from the visiting center, kind of cat a corner. And Temple Lot is a very small group, maybe 10,000, but they own the piece of property. They own the actual property where Joseph said, this is where Jesus would build his temple. And all sorts of Mormons from different stripes will come there because Joseph Smith's initials are on this stone that they found decades ago. Anyway, so everybody wants to see the place. And we go in there every year. We've had great talks with them. They are not LDS. They are definitely not. They are Church of Christ Temple Lot. They do not believe in polygamy. And I had their chief apostle tell me a couple of years ago, William Sheldon, old fellow who's died now. And I brought up him being married to these other women. And he goes, oh, no, Joseph wasn't married to those women. I go, but sir, there's so much proof of this. He goes, oh, no, he wasn't married. He's just committing adultery. And I'm like,
wow.
The big one hit me, because no Mormon's ever been so honest that I've ever talked to. But their belief, followed up, why do you still believe in Joseph? And their belief is that Joseph was a true prophet of God up into the publication of the Book of Mormon. Yeah, there's the RLDS Center right there, and that looks like that could be the Temple Lot building right there. Yes, it is. So LDS over here on the right, and Remnant Group is over there, and there's several other smaller groups. There's hundreds of Mormon spinoffs that most people don't know about. I don't even know about most of them, but anyhow, so we talked to them, and she had to go. So we came back the next morning, and we spent probably an hour and a half going through some of their films. They're claiming that everything was changed in 570 AD, and that's when the apostasy happened. I've never run into Mormon groups listing a date before because they get in trouble because there's nothing significant about the date. But they wanted to go 1,230 years back from Joseph Smith's publication of the Book of Mormon. Anyways, we had a great talk with this lady who was the host of the thing there. Then we went, we had a luncheon with several people that split off from the Remnant Group. Again, these people sound like Baptists. They split so often. In 1984, the reorganized Latter-day Saint went very liberal. You can really see it. It's like the United Methodist Church with Joseph Smith thrown in for no apparent reason. But if you go downstairs, they have a basement museum with lots of really old classic Mormon stuff. So if you're interested even in that history, and we've had some good conversations down there. So we went in there to the RLDS Center and Community of Christ Now. And we went downstairs, and we had Keith and I and a couple other people, my wife and Keith's youth pastor friend. We had probably 2.5 hours with this lady who's a teacher for the Community of Christ. And at one point, she literally said, it doesn't matter whether Jesus rose from the dead or not. So we had a fascinating conversation with a church leader who claimed it did not matter. So that's how liberal the group was. We gave her lots of good arguments as to why it mattered. Literally, she's crying at one point, but it was very friendly and very sweet. Then we went... the next day, we had a big lunch with a group that one of our missionaries, Trevor, had found online, and they are a split off from the Remnant. The Remnant split from the RLDS Community of Christ in 1984 when they went liberal, but then there's been several split offs from that. And so, anyways, we went to a barbecue with a whole bunch of these folks, and we sat for hours with these people.
You really sound like a hateful person when you
I
keep
am.
stories.
It
Yeah.
was horrible. We had a great talk with these people and exchanged numbers and wanted to keep talking with them and talked about, the gospel. The church has never been lost. What Jesus says about the church. Talked a lot about their claim of being the restored church, mainly about who Jesus is, who Joseph was. And again, they don't buy into the polygamy either. That's all a vicious lie that Brigham Young did. Has nothing to do with them. So that was Emma Smith's position. She started with her son, Joseph's first wife. She always hated Brigham. So anyways, there's so many splinters and split offs, but great opportunities to talk about who Jesus actually is, what the church actually is, who God is, what the Bible says, as opposed to Joseph Smith's additions to the Bible. They kept playing on that. Well, Joseph, did these additions and it helps us understand this. Well, no, actually it doesn't. It actually changes the whole story. Anyways, we had a very friendly talk with them. So that's just the Mormon connection that we had over 2 days with several different kinds of Mormons. And from there, it got weird.
From there it got weird. So each of them have kind of a different Jesus in their mix. That we find that that's true of a lot of groups. They each have they like Jesus, a Jesus. They sort of redesign them as they go. And we have a sponsor that speaks to that issue.
Yes, we do. And, it has a lot to do with, if you can hold on a second, it has a lot to do with social embarrassment that people feel. And, I had actually queued up the other commercial. So now that you've segued this way, I've got to act quickly.
It was the demon voice.
Say that again?
It was the demon voice.
Yeah, it was
the demon voice.
Demon voice. Okay. Do you cringe when the Christians you hang out with try to introduce Jesus to your non-Christian friends? Well, you can say goodbye to the days when your church's Jesus was a source of social embarrassment. Now, even your church can keep pace with the latest fashion-forward trends in spirituality. Introducing the Designer Jesus Collection. These amazing new Jesus styles are hitting church runways in the most exclusive Jesus fashion shows at churches near you. You don't want to miss Yoga Jesus, Hipster Jesus, Buddy Jesus, Socialist Jesus, Mormon Jesus, and of course, Muslim Jesus. At Designer Jesus Collection fashion shows, you will find a Jesus you'll be proud to introduce to your most sophisticated, cutting-edge friends and acquaintances. Please observe the attendance requirements. Cost of admission, your eternal soul. Required attire, semi-formal. All proceeds benefit His Royal Majesty of the Kingdom of Darkness. The Designer Jesus Collection. London, Paris, Rome, New York, Salt Lake City. And coming soon to a church runway near you. So, could you explain something to me, Bill, just for those of people out there who might be like me and don't have all their Mormon history tied up nicely in a little bow, the whole thing about, what was it called again? Temple something? Let me show it to you.
The Temple Lot?
The Temple Lot?
Yeah. Okay, so this is Independence, Missouri, which is real close to Kansas City, right?
Yes, in just suburb.
And it's where Harry Truman lived and retired and died and all that.
And those signs are everywhere too.
Yeah. So, in fact, that's the only thing I really knew about it until today. I don't think I knew at all about the Temple Lot. And so it turns out that Joseph Smith goes there 1830, 31 or something like that. He dies in 1844 in Nauvoo, Illinois. So,
the Mormons got chased out of Independence, which was Jackson County at the time.
Okay.
And that's what happened. Joseph predicted the temple would be built there, blah, 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 blah. Lots of history between them and other Mormons. Joseph was claiming to be king and president and general, and he had a large group of armed men, and people in Missouri got excited and unhappy, and all sorts of bad things happened. All you have to do is walk into any LDS center, and they will give you that history word for word. Of course, their side of it, but not mentioning the fact that there was killings from both sides. Anyways, so that building right in the middle of your picture.
When you say middle, you mean the white one?
Yes, the little white brick one. That's
Okay.
the Temple Lot Center. And where those green trees are, just to the right of it, is basically covering up the area where they have it all stoned out. You can walk around it, where Joseph said that Jesus would return, not in Zion, Israel, in Zion, Missouri. Jesus will return there. We had an interesting talk with several different Mormons on that one. Anyhow, he will return there. He will build his temple right there. So there's this little tiny group that everybody wants that property. So they've been offered huge amounts of money from the folks right next to him in the upside down popsicle or ice cream. Excuse me.
So that's over here. This is this.
Yeah, that's them. And then just across the street from them is the visiting center for the Salt Lake gang, and they've also offered money. So everybody wants the group that's in the white church to sell off.
Who are these people here?
That's the Community of Christ, formerly the Reorganized Latter-day Saints, founded by Emma Smith and her son Joseph Smith III. So they did not go with Brigham across the plains in a wheel cart. They hated Brigham. Emma really hated Brigham, and I don't blame her. Brigham's a very hateable guy. Anyways, they founded their church in 1860, 16 years after Joseph was killed, and so it's the second largest Mormon group, maybe 250, 300,000. A lot of these other smaller groups are remnant over here. Stone building, I think on the left is remnant, I think.
Over here.
I can't see the sign, but they're right in that street somewhere. And they split away from those guys with the ice cream cones. So there's been a lot of split offs. But Temple Lot is a small group, but they just happen to have the place, literally the place on the planet.
Wow.
Mormons believe Jesus is going to return to and build his temple right there.
It's
not that big an acreage, so you wonder, it's going to be a pretty underwhelming temple, even if you take this seriously at all. I don't.
Yeah.
But Mormons come from all over the world to see this spot.
Over here, on where my arrow is floating, I'm trying to float it. That's where across the street from the fallen ice cream cone is there's the actual LDS church.
Right. Just to give you a difference in crossing the street, anybody that knows anything about Mormons, they have no use for the cross. You'll never see a cross on any Mormon, on a church, any of their literature, right? And that was true of these people as well, of the RLDS at the time. They would never have a cross. So we actually had a talk with a lady probably 15 years ago. She was guiding us through the whole thing. And she'd been around a while. She was around before the split. She grew up in the Community of Christ, RLDS. So I asked her at one point, I go, let me ask you, did it hurt your feelings? Did it really hurt you when they put that cross up in your building? Because the RLDS Community of Christ now has crosses, has for 35 years.
Wow. And
she looked around to make sure nobody was watching and she shook her head, yes, yes. Because it's not a part of their thinking. In any Mormon brand, the cross is pretty much irrelevant. So when they put a cross up, that's what I said, it's very liberal for Mormons. That represented a huge change, and that and allowing women elders and stuff like this was a big thing for the remnant groups who split away. And again, like Baptists, they just keep splitting and splitting and splitting. There's one group in the town there that's still an identifiable Mormon group. There's 8 members.
Wow.
And what do they have against the cross?
Well, the cross is irrelevant because, when Joseph starts his whole movement, the restoration, Christianity had been lost. Literally for most Mormons since the time of the apostles. Christianity disappeared. Joseph was brought about. God raised up Joseph to restore the gospel. Well, since you got, in any cult, you've got to stand out or there's no point in you being there, right? So all the churches around him, including the 3 that Joseph talks about in my name, Baptist, Presbyterian, Methodist, all have crosses. So we don't want to fit in with that mix, although Joseph joined a Methodist church after he had been told not to join, but that's another story. Anyway, so one of the things that has marked the Mormons since their inception is that not having the cross, because if you watch Mormon videos, they've changed actually. They're getting more sneaky. Some of the older videos, say 15 years ago, said Jesus paid for our sins in the Garden of Gethsemane when he sweat, according to the King James, as if drops of blood. And Mormon videos would literally center in the garden when they talked about Jesus paying for our sins. And then the cross is irrelevant. Well, if you watch the videos now, they bring up the garden. They'll still show you a close-up of the garden tomb in Jerusalem. And then they focus on, not even the garden tomb, the garden outside. Then they focus on the cross for just a second. Like they're trying to mix it in again. But, of course, you'll never see one on their churches or anything like that. At least, but the Mormon probably can change his mind with, because it's Tuesday. So we'll see. But anyways, Temple Lot is very different. most of these groups, the remnant groups and everything, the interesting thing about them is they all reject polygamy because they're all split offs of RLDS. And they reject the idea that we can all become gods, which is so central to LDS thinking. Right. So I was talking to the Restoration people, and they were denying that. And I said, well, what do you do with the King Follett sermon, which was a sermon given at one of Joseph Smith's friends about 2 months or so before he died, where he clearly says, I have to teach you how to become gods and all this kind of stuff. And they said, well, we think that was inaccurately recorded by Brigham Young and his people. So all the stuff that's so knowable about Mormons, if you're familiar with Mormon theology from the LDS, so much of that has been changed. And these people don't buy into any of that at all. They believe instead that, just the Book of Mormon and the Bible. The fact that the Book of Mormon has, and we had lots of conversations, no connection to historical reality, archaeology. But I thought it was fascinating to talk to all of them again. And much like the LDS, they're all putting the Book of Mormon battles and stories down in the Central Plains of Mexico and in South and Central America, basically. And that's going to move the Mormons up. The LDS has been making for about 30 or 40 years. So you walk into the centers and you will see pictures or dioramas of, Incan pyramids and Mayan pyramids and Azteca pyramids and all these people who were really Jews. And like, nice try, guys. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, really.
Anyways, so we had great talks with them. So the Temple lot is the place on the planet that's most important.
Is it oversimplifying it to say that if a group broke off from the LDS in the 19th century, it was because it rejected polygamy, but if it broke off in the 20th century, it's because it embraced polygamy?
As much as our Mormon friends, Latter-day Saint friends, want to deny it, according to the Attorney General of the state of Utah, I was in a meeting listening to him talk about this. There are tens of thousands of polygamists all across Salt Lake Plains, the Valley, all across the rest of Utah, and they know it. So the LDS can stand on its high horse all they want and say, we don't embrace that. They're not real Mormons. But the reality is these groups, I would call them old school Mormons. They're doing what Joseph did. And the ones who deny the polygamy, to me, are denying reality as far as Joseph himself. But the thing is human beings tend to fracture. It's very hard to say all Christians say X or all Muslims say Y or all Buddhists say. I mean, human beings tend to split and refract all over the place. So it's not unusual to see this in other religions as well. There's so many different varieties. You know what you guys need to add to your Jesus mix? That makes me think about this. There is the Buddhist Jesus. Come on, guys, catch up.
Oh, I forgot him. Yeah.
We've got the Hindu Jesus, the Avatar Jesus, which we just heard about the Hare Krishna Temple. But, this is, what's his ears is on TV all the time. My brain just went dead. A big fan of Maharishi for so long. Ayurvedic medicine. Oh, I'll think of him in a second. He's been on TV a lot for 20 plus years.
Are you saying I have to modify the Designer Jesus collection?
I'm saying you need to keep up with the times. There are so many more Jesuses out there, Ron. And Buddha Jesus, why didn't you know? Jesus came 2,000 years ago to set straight everybody's karma and on and on and on.
I just, I'm just behind the times, like you said.
I guess you are.
Yeah. So, anyway.
So is Ford coming out with a new vehicle called the Karma?
Well, Jesus drove a Honda, but he never talked about it. Because as it says in scripture, he spoke not of his own accord.
Oh. I just want it on record. Nobody from Haven gives puns like this, please.
Okay. So that's your Mormon adventures. Now, I know while you were there, you talked to other groups. In fact, I see a book of one of those groups on your desk there.
Hey, this is the scriptures, don't you know? Ta-da for your camera.
Wait a minute, what is that?
This is my free book I got from the Theology and Practice of a Contemporary Religion, Scientology, a reference work.
Now, are you legally allowed to own that? I mean, are Tom Cruise's henchmen going to come after you?
Gosh, that would be an interesting conversation. I would love that. We spent over 2 hours with the head of the Kansas City Scientology Center. She's been a member for like 40 years. Don, she knows our old friend Kathy Norman.
Oh, really?
Yeah, she knew Kathy. And so we had a long, interesting conversation with her, raised Catholic, Like a lot of people we find in different cults and stuff, they're former Catholics or Jews, a whole lot of people like that. Anyway, so we had a great talk with her, and we watched a couple of her videos. They make serious videos. They have so much Hollywood, talent and so much money that their videos are very impressive. Doesn't make the ideas any better. It certainly doesn't qualify L. Ron Hubbard, the founder, to have it make any sense out of anything. But we got to share the gospel with her. And Mark Roggeman, who's very familiar, was talking to her a lot. And my wife, Terry, and Trevor, we all had this great conversation with this lady for several hours. So that was really good. And we try not to get into all their space nonsense. But the question of who is God, comes up. And L. Ron Hubbard himself claimed that he got all his ideas from studying all the great masters, Hinduism and Buddhism and all this stuff. So they're real big on reincarnation. But this is very interesting. Like these Hare Krishnas pulled on us the next day. They give a soft view of karma because they want to talk about how we have free will. So coming out of, good old American revivalism in the 1800s, free will is a big issue. And these guys, they all play on it. So there's karma, except we can freely choose to change our karma and go a different direction, which is not the historic understanding of karma, but it is the Americanized version.
It is the Americanized version. Now, for those who are unfamiliar with Scientology, we probably need to give just a brief overview because we're familiar. Tom Cruise is a Scientologist, and so that's, kind of made news. We know that they are somewhat litigious. That has been on the news. There's a lot of controversy going on around now about where is David Miscavige's wife. No one has seen her for a while. What does that mean? But they don't really seem to know generally what Scientology actually is. And I've had to explain, and you might want to pick up on this, that according to Hubbard, its founder, we all actually lived in other places, and then this evil scientist put us on a large spacecraft that looked like, a B-12 bomber or something? Some kind of
I thought it was a 707, but it doesn't really matter.
Yeah. And brought us to this planet, chained us to volcanoes, and then exploded atomic bombs, which is the whole mountain exploding thing you see on their commercials.
Is that what?
That,
okay.
Yeah, that's what that is.
I thought that was just like the release of all the energy in Dianetics that
No. That's the bomb dropping thing. And then we are actually, as you pointed out, we're just reincarnations, and so their whole auditing system is geared to help you find out bad events in your previous lives,
which cause trouble in your current life. It's very pragmatic.
Which cause trouble in your current life, and it costs you about $250,000 of auditing, going through this process to ferret out all of your bad experience from previous lives and get to a point they call clear. And you would think, okay, now I'm clear, I'm safe. And no, actually, you're now in more danger because you also have something called body thetans, which is other souls that have attached themselves to your soul. And now you got to start figuring out their problems to get them fixed. Is that about right?
Yeah, and the money keeps rolling in. The saddest thing at all about this is, after they've taken everything you have, your house, your business, your whatever property you actually have, after they've taken everything, you have the freedom then to sign a billion-year contract where you can fold towels, in one of their hotels. You can be a servant, a slave, basically, and get your auditing for free. But it's really big on money. It's so wrong in so many. L. Ron Hubbard was a bad science fiction.
How many people do you think?
He's a terrible writer.
How many people do you think have signed those contracts?
It's not like the church is advertising them, so it's hard to call it a church, But anyways, it's not like Scientologists advertise how many people sign their contracts. But, Leah Remini, a former Hyde member and a Hollywood star, has been taking them on in the Arts Entertainment Network. And so they have a lot to say about her. Everybody that's on the show, it's former Scientologist, a liar and a hater and an evil person, It's like the JWs. There's so many other groups. You can't leave because out of good conscience. You leave because in Mormon land, you're homosexual or an adulterer. That's why you left. You didn't leave because you found out Joseph Smith was actually an adulterer. And Scientologists have their own version. So Leah Remini was an angry, hateful person. The PR guy that's on the show with her a lot, he's a hateful, angry person. Everybody's hateful that leaves the church. And that's their standard response to all these different things. But, most of our time is spent talking about God and the gospel and what do we do about sin, and which they don't talk about. It's all pragmatic. Tom Cruise says the reason he joined and became such a big fan is because they helped him with his dyslexia. Most of the people that I have met that are Scientologists currently who are raised in some other religion, of course, they say you can still maintain yours. I'm sure. Anyways, most of them are people that, had a problem with their teenagers or had a problem with quitting smoking or overweight, and they're very pragmatically driven. So if you take these courses, it will help with that problem. You're not going to hear about evil Lord Zenu until you're hundreds of thousands of dollars and multiple years in, until your entire identity's been swallowed up by this nasty Borg thing. And by that time, you're sucked in. But it starts with pragmatics. Every single conversation I've ever had, and every time I've ever seen them advertise, and every time we go out walking, hey, what's this all about? Well, this can help you with your problems. See, it's all pragmatic. In America, pragmatism sells. It really does.
Mm. So do you think those billion-year contracts will hold up in court?
Good call. I guess I'm thankful I was just obnoxious enough and didn't have any money to boot, but I was just obnoxious enough. I think if I'd been sucked into like something like this, I would have told somebody to get off in probably more graphic terms when I was younger. I've always been thankful that when the Lord grabbed me, he got me to a solid Bible-believing church and went to Bible college and seminary, and actually I learned what the Word of God says, because the more you deal with the cults, the more you realize, if churches, all of them, I'll say for a second here, did a good job of discipling their people, I wouldn't have a job. And I mean that in the best possible sense.
Yes.
Everybody, 99.9% of the people I've talked to in doing this almost 30 years now are former Christians, a handful of Jews, and a couple of atheists. Everyone else went to some church growing up. Amish, Catholic, Baptist, Free Church, Presbyterian, lots of Catholics. And they know nothing about the Bible. They know nothing about, what the Bible actually says about God. They really don't know. And so then they get sucked into one of these groups, and with a designer Jesus, as your ad rightly points out, and they get discipled in all the false ideas. So,
right, discipled in all the false ideas, and that is a really important element of this whole discussion. We were talking before we went live about a study that was done. Lifeway did 2 years ago at the request of Haven Ministries. And in the study, they had 3,000 or 3,500 people answer the questions from general culture. And of those who answered, 75% claimed they were Christians. Of that 75%, something like 7 out of 10, so 70% of that group, said that they believed in the doctrine of the Trinity. Of that, and then they went on to say about 50% of those who took the survey thought that Jesus was the first creation of God. So that's interesting. So they have a really heretical view of who Jesus is. They affirm the Trinity, and yet they believe he's a created being. Now you would think, okay, well, that's culture. That's just generally people out there that sort of subscribe to some Christian ideas. And so they redid the survey with 586 evangelicals, as identified by the National Association of Evangelicals. Of that, 70% said Jesus is the first creation of God. So evangelicals did worse on that question than culture in general. What does that tell us about what our churches are doing in terms of discipling people into the true faith?
You really want to go down this rabbit hole. I lost the word evangelical 30 years ago in so many ways, but the reality is now we don't teach our people. And I'll just give you a contrast. At Haven, I've been pushing this, Don, you've heard me do this many times. I've been pushing this idea that when we're witnessing to Mormons, Muslims, Buddhists, New Agers, Wiccans, whatever, atheists, we are literally discipling them in the sense that we are teaching them the truth about who God actually is. We are correcting false ideas with true ideas. So, for example, my own personal story, I didn't think about God at all. If I did, rarely, between getting high or drunk, God was this old guy with a club. And he hated me. And every time I got busted by the cops, or every time I got beat up by my stepdad, that was just God doing what God does. And that was, again, it wasn't a deep thought out thing because I was usually trying to get high instead of thinking. So when I found out the fact that God actually loved me and Jesus came to die for me, even though I'm an ungodly person, Romans 5:8, it was world shattering. It was a whole different idea than what I understood before. And it changed my world. So when I tell a Mormon, God is not the byproduct of a sexual relationship between Elohim and his own daughter, Mary, I'm correcting them. I'm discipling them. I'm teaching them who God really is. And when we talk about why you should trust the Bible, again, we're discipling, we're teaching. Whether they've come to faith or not, we're still in the process of doing that. So to me, that's what real missions looks like. You're literally correcting false ideas, idolatrous, blasphemous ideas about God with biblical ideas, with good ideas about God.
Right. So you're actually, and I had a long discussion with someone who's helping us to promote our conference for next year. And he was a little puzzled about what we're trying to do as he's sort of dreaming up different thematic ideas and that sort of thing. I said, look, you have to understand, in my view, and you just really said the same thing, apologetics is a tool, and that's all it is. It's just a tool. And it's used to disciple people into the faith by explaining what the faith is to them.
Yep.
And then it's a tool to disciple them after they're in the faith so they can understand and live out that faith and prepare to do the next step, which is missions, reaching out with the gospel to those outside the church. And so you disciple them into the faith, you disciple them once they are in the faith in order for them to be able to go out then and reach others with the gospel. Was it?
I agree 100%. To me, evangelism, witnessing, apologetics, these are all synonyms. It's the same concept. When Jesus tells, the crowds about who God actually is, you have heard it was said, and then, but I say to you, and he corrects these thoughts, these bad thoughts, for example. You've heard it was said, love your neighbor, and then the addition from the, later the Talmudic tradition, but hate your neighbor. Love your neighbor, biblical, but hate your enemy, not biblical. But in the Jewish mindset, it was together of his day. And the Talmud later writes that in stone. My point would be when Jesus is doing this, he's correcting their false ideas about who God is.
And he also did something else. He elevated his statement to a level of equal to the Word of God.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
And
so
they didn't like that.
They didn't like that. I mean, they clearly understood he was claiming to be God in the flesh.
Had that conversation with Hare Krishnas just the other day.
Yeah.
Oh, Jesus never claimed to be God. Actually, he did. Let's talk about John 8. And we went into that.
Right. So your time with Hare Krishnas. Let's progress to that one here. Oh, you know what? We should probably take another as we lead into this.
This is a perfect time to talk about.
Perfect time, yeah.
If we're going to talk about Hare Krishna or any of the,
Eastern mystical groups.
Yeah, we got a story. So one day, Rob Bell was walking along, not watching where he was going, and he smacked right into the Dalai Lama. Bang. The Dalai Lama says, "Hey, you got Christianity in my Buddhism." And Rob Bell says, "You got Buddhism in my Christianity." And then they decided that it's not all about truth, but experience. And isn't taste one of the best experiences? Two great faiths that taste great together. Reese's, Jesus, Buddha cups. You need to try them. They're just something else.
So there you go, Bill. Something for your next adventures. You can take some Reese's.
I just did that talk at the EM&R conference down in New Orleans. So, yeah, there's so much of that across the country. Our leading seminaries and Christian schools are engaged in Buddhist chanting, but they disguise it by throwing a few verses on top. Instead of saying, Nomo Myoho Renge Kyo, they say, come Lord Jesus, come Lord Jesus. Somehow meditative states and contemplative prayer movement has literally captured the Christian academic world, and it's heartbreaking to me.
So you talk with Hare Krishna. Tell us about your Hare Krishna adventures. What if I was going to talk with a Hare Krishna and I couldn't take my megaphone and blast them out? What would my next step be?
Well, go where they are, which is what we do. So we went to their temple in Kansas City. The sad thing to me was that virtually everybody except for one was a young man, 25, 20, 22. Hare Krishnas, you thought when they got going in the 60s and 70s were so, and that older generation that blew up in so many literal ways almost, you would hope they would have died. But here's a whole younger generation that have embraced this nonsense. It's a subset of Hinduism. It's considered a cult by most Hindu gurus and scholars, the teachers. They view Hare Krishna in India like we view Mormons here. They're not really authentic. And there's all sorts of technical reasons, but nonetheless, you go into their temple, the one we went to, and there's a big statue of their founder, Prabhupada. And so you'll see people literally throw themselves on the floor and look up to make eye contact with a statue. That's very important. That's Hindu teaching. And then over here is a male and female to idols of Krishna. So they'll finish with Prabhupada, then they'll go over and throw themselves on the floor and put their eyes up and make eye contact with the two gods. The Hindus call that darshan. It's letting the idol know, the God within the idol, that you're there to make eye contact. So get it, the Shinto clap and ring bells to make sure the spirits are listening. The Hare Krishna make eye contact. So when you go to any Hindu temple of any kind, you see big eyes on the gods. That's theology.
Forgot to turn it off. Sorry.
That was poetic.
Yes.
We did the good and the bad. Now we're doing the ugly. Anyways, idols are a big thing inside of all of Hinduism, and they certainly are in the Hare Krishna movement. The idea, again, is that you chant, and Hare Krishnas are big-time vegetarians. Not all Hindus are. You chant the names of God literally hundreds and hundreds of times every day, different Hindu gods, Hare Hare, Rama Rama, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Krishna Rama, all this stuff. You chant these things thousands of days. And here comes the twist. And by doing that, you will receive the grace and mercy of the God Krishna. Now, that's a definitively Americanized version of Hinduism, to talk about grace and mercy, because at first it's all about karma. Karma dictates whatever happens to your life, standard Hindu thought. And then we get the free will thing where Krishna gives grace and mercy. So you do the right thing. You meditate, you chant the names of the divine gods, you eat vegan food, and off you go. So they mix in all this stuff. And by the end of this conversation, and again, if you really don't know what you're dealing with, some of them are really good at playing the game. They sound like Baptists sometimes. I had several years ago, I had to talk with their PR guy. If you did not know him better, he'd swear he's Franklin Graham. He's that conservative sounding. But if you know what they actually believe and what Krishna is all about, then you can cut through this really fast. But most people don't. Most Americans barely know who Jesus is, let alone what the Hare Krishna teach. Anyway, so we walk in there and we start talking, and like we always do, we say, hey, what is this all about? And so we let them give their presentation. Here's what we do, and here's how we're serving the world, and here's how the world would be changed by chanting these words and eating vegan and all this kind of stuff. So we had 3 or 4 of them for a conversation, and it was great. It was really good. And we were contrasting what the Bible actually says about God and Jesus with what the Bhagavad Gita, the central book of Hinduism, out of zillions of books, that's the big one. And it's certainly the big one for the Hare Krishna. So I have read the Gita. I know this stuff. I know what it says. It's nasty. It's okay to murder people because they're not real. That's what the Gita says. That's what Lord Krishna says in chapter 2. So I go right to that. And they have to sing and spin and dance and try to make that not sound as bad as it does. But it does sound bad.
Do they really sing and spin and dance? Or is it?
Well, I'll say this verbally, metaphorically, figuratively, but they do spin and dance at other times during their so-called worship, the satsangs. But when we were talking to them, they were trying to make sense out of, guys, if this world's an illusion and nobody ever dies, nobody ever gets raped, nobody ever gets stolen, there's no reason to get excited about the war, all the things that Americans, so they have to spin this and make it dance. The thing that really got them bent out is the claim was, if you just do these things, you'll be enlightened at an incredible level and you'll be such a better person, blah, 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 blah. But, and Marcus Roggeman for our staff is probably the best guy around on this stuff. They have been sued almost out of existence. They lost a ton of their properties 20 years ago because of all the child molesting going on in their ashrams and the Krishna centers, the gun running, the drugs, all done by Prabhupada's inner circle. His inner circle of disciples were running illegal firearms and drugs, and there's basically all their centers around the country were basically just, they were molesting children everywhere across the country. So this blew up. And so one of my questions is, if Prabhupada was such a spiritual enlightened master, and his inner circle had been with him for decades at this point when they're doing all this stuff, how come he doesn't see this? Jesus knows his guys from the very first moment, and I would argue from before. But he clearly says it. He knew exactly who Judas was, right? The Prabhupada, great enlightened master, didn't know any of this stuff. Of course, they're trying to rescue him, much like Mormons are trying to rescue Joseph from Brigham. They try to rescue Prabhupada. He was so enlightened, and he didn't know all this stuff was going on, but it was all his inner circle. So when you talk to the Baha'i or something, and they want to rescue Muhammad from all his fans, well, guys, they were all his buddies. They were with him at every moment. Abdul Bakr and Uthman and all these guys, those were his guys. So when they're out killing people after Muhammad dies, that's what Muhammad was like. So you want to try to rescue your leader, but there's too much literature on. And I brought up at one point, the most embarrassing point where the guy started to go from nice conversation to a little upset with me, is I brought up a very famous, terrible story about Krishna. That this is their literature. I'm not throwing rocks at them. I'm just using their own stuff. Krishna and the gopi maids. These are cow herders. These are a bunch of girls, and Krishna went all frat boy on them. They all decided to be naughty and went skinny dipping in the river and left their clothes by the side of the river. And Krishna went and grabbed all their robes, and they're like begging, oh, please, Lord Krishna, please let us have our clothes, blah, blah, blah. And he says, oh, no, you have to come out of the water one at a time if you want me to get your robe. And I'm like, what the heck is that? And the guy got really upset because I had challenged, basically the divine of all divine. And I said, well, guys, you have to explain to me. I used the word frat boy, which I think made him really mad. But what else do you call that? This is their story. There's other stories I didn't even get into. There's another famous story about Krishna where he's out in the forest in the middle of the night playing his flute. He's very famous for this. A lot of pictures of him playing the flute. And he's enticing all the women of the village, married and single women, to come out and party with him. Again, the frat boy god. What else do you call this? So the Hare Krishna try to, hope you don't know that stuff. And most people don't, of course. And, but anyways, that got them a little bit wired. And then the guy literally said this. He goes, well, the word Christ and the word Krishna, and he's like Krishnas, and he literally tries to meet the two words in the middle. I go, nice try.
Right.
I said the Hebrew word for Christ is Mashiach. It has no relation. The Greek word Christos is basically their translation, the anointing from the word Mashiach. So Jesus was never called the Christ. It would have been Yeshua HaMashiach, which has no relationship or sound like or anything to Krishna of India. Right. So, you're just playing every card he could with Christians. But again, we got to share the gospel. We got to, several times, we got them to think about stuff. What do you do with evil? What about our sin, our behavior? It doesn't go away because you chant and all this kind of. Anyways, it was good.
Yeah, you know what? And so we're kind of back to saying, here's why you do what you do, because you have learned what the Christian faith is supposed to be historically and biblically, and you also have learned about other religions in order to be able to be a missionary and ask them good questions. I had one some years ago. We went through a Hindu temple with a former Hindu, Ravi Narasimhan, love Ravi, who was a Christian. And we had about a dozen of us or so as we went through the temple, and he would explain different things. And he had set it up to have the guy that was kind of like a tour guide at the temple to take us through. And so they're going through, and he's explaining all the different incarnations of Vishnu and why each stop they're doing different kind of rituals and practices. And I kind of listened to the whole thing. And at the end, I asked a friend, one of our friends said, is Jesus an incarnation of Vishnu? And he said, oh, yes, he is. I said, I have a question. I just, maybe you can help me. It's just one question, really. Would one incarnation of Vishnu lie about all the other incarnations of Vishnu? And he said, oh, no, it's not possible. I said, oh, okay. So help me understand this then, because Jesus said he was the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except by him. Therefore, all the other incarnations would be false. And he stood there for a few seconds, and he didn't really know what to do with it. And finally he said, Jesus lied, and he turned and walked away.
Yeah, there we go.
It's kind of a difficult place to be if you want to incorporate both together. The second thing that he kept insisting on is that all paths lead to God. And so I have to say these days, that's true. All paths do lead to God. But that's not the final destination. There is a meeting. It says every knee will bow and bend, and every tongue will confess that Jesus is God to the glory of the Father. So
my old professor, Dr. Lewis, would always say that all paths do lead to God as judge.
Right.
You don't want that.
That's correct. So, and that's the point. That's not the final destination. That meeting will determine where you go from there. So,
Right.
so the challenge is, let's think about this, for church leadership to begin training and discipling believers into understanding and being able to defend the faith. Is that somehow different than, say, the Willow Creek Saddleback idea of we need to just find any way to get people into the church and so sneak up on them with the gospel? Is that kind of what?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I'm racking my mind as you said that for Matthew 28, the Great Commission, to include that part about sneaking up on them with, the greatest, lowest common denominator of Christianity, and somehow they'll magically become Christians. The Lord says, go out into all the nations, teaching them all things I have commanded you. And baptizing in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. The whole Matthew 28 Great Commission, as it's commonly called. Dumbing down the faith is very effective. But this is I have a Catholic model for this. This is the Xavier model. Xavier, a very famous Catholic missionary in the 1500s, somewhere in there, went to China to bring the Catholic Church into China. And so people from his own movement, 20 years later, Catholics went to visit, and they saw nothing observably Catholic at all, except that people with all their other gods on their god shelf would have a little statue of Mary. And they would get baptized. And the Catholic form of missions is modeled on that, is that, look, all we have to do is get them into Mary, baptize them so they can get rid of their original sin, and then God will sort this out in purgatory one way or the other. So you get famous examples across the Caribbean of that. The old joke about Haiti, it's 70% Catholic, whatever, and 100% Voodooan. Most of the Catholics I've talked to, I'm not saying all, most of the Catholics I've talked to over the last 30 years are psychics and all this kind of stuff at the psychic fairs. We embrace virtually everything, and the Catholic Church seems to turn a blind eye. Mark and I were at a big, this was several years ago, at the conference in New Orleans, back before the flood. We went to this huge, very historic 400-year-old Catholic church. And I wasn't raised in any church. Mark was raised in a Catholic church. So he's taking me through and explaining the stations and all this kind of stuff. And then we got to this huge veranda on the back end of the church, giant open patio, tarot card readers, astrologers, psychic this, psychic that, all right there on the church property, operating literally alongside the church. And that to me, Willow Creek and all these other groups are just doing a slightly more respectable version of the same phenomena. Don't challenge people. Let's just get them along by agreeing with them as much as possible. So, we had this discussion at even several years ago with our past president, Mr. John, and he was embracing this guy in Australia, Philip Johnson, not the Philip Johnson from Berkeley, who was embracing Christian astrology, Christian tarot. And what do you see in churches? You have Christian yoga, you have Christian chanting, you have Christian astrology, you have virtually Christian tarot cards. All this stuff is all over the churches today. So yeah, you can go into most churches. I won't say most. You can go into a lot of churches today and find nothing that will actually challenge anything you actually believe, and virtually nothing biblical, because the Bible corrects what I believe, as opposed to me just mending my own thoughts with. And so the Christian yoga phenomena is monstrous. It's huge. The Buddhist chanting contemplative prayer thing is huge. And frankly, like I said, I run into more hatred and anger from churches who get mad when I talk like this than I do from talking to actual Buddhists.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's true. So, well, we are going to have to wrap it up for today, Bill. I thank you for being with us.
Always a pleasure.
And for your contact information, how can people get to your website? Where is that at?
Havenministry.com. Very simple. Havenministry, one word.com.
And they can email hate mail to you through there if they want?
Yes, they can throw all the figurative tomatoes they want and rocks. They'd have to get a long line, but yes, they can.
Get in line.
That's right.
Mr. Hensel, would you care to walk us out of here?
I would very much like to do that. Our resident cult leader profiler is Neil before me. Our wardrobe manager is See How It Fits You. Our culinary services come from Chef Ham and Cheese. Our tinfoil hat provisioner is Just In Case. Our Jehovah's Witnesses coverage comes from Armageddon and D Opposer. Our Mormon archives manager is Polly Gummas. Our liberal denominations bureau chief is Lucy Goosey. Our transgender issues coverage comes from Ben Hur. Our special correspondent for cults based on the Hindenburg disaster and flying turkeys, Ode to Humanity. Our fact-checking supervisor, Yoleg Pulling. Our technical assistance comes through Murky Research. Our legal advisors are at the law firm of Dewey, Cheatham, and Howe. Our grievance resolutions director is Giovanna Pisami. Our director of privacy assurance is Wiretapping. And our original idea sourcing comes from Drew LeBlanc. The Unknown Webcast is a production of Midwest Christian Outreach, Inc., in cooperation with Emergency Manicure Productions, both of which are solely responsible for this content, but you will never be able to prove that in a court of law.
Never happened. All right. Bill, hold on a second. And Ron, everyone else, adios.
Adios.